From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views. So joining me today are my frequent guests on tax policy topics, John Traub and Anna Taylor from Deloitte's Tax Policy Group. And today we're recording a special tax policy edition. So today is the Thursday before Memorial Day, 2025. And we are here to discuss one big, beautiful bill. And so after a couple of very long days and nights, we've reached an important milestone on the journey of this one big, beautiful bill becoming law, and that was the House passage. So, John, it was just a week ago that we talked when the House Ways and Means Committee approved the bill, and there has been a lot of activity leading to the floor passage early this morning. So can you explain exactly what happened in the last 36 hours or so?
Yeah, a couple of things happened. First of all, we saw over the weekend the House Budget Committee, which is the ministerial job of just stapling together the reconciliation products of various House committees. They studied over this on Friday afternoon and they reconvened on Sunday night, and they got that passed by the narrows and margins. We had very early Wednesday morning at 1 a.m., the Rules Committee of the House began meeting at a marathon 19-hour meeting to hear testimony from members who sought to have amendments made in order, none of which were. They eventually came out late on Wednesday night with a rule for considering the bill on the House floor that included what's called a self-executing amendment that made changes to the bill that reflected deals made by Speaker Johnson with several groups of members who were reluctant to vote on the bill as passed by none of the Ways and Means Committee, but the Medicaid provisions from Energy and Commerce, et cetera. And then the House voted on and passed the bill in the very early morning hours, about 6 a.m. on today, Thursday. So it was kind of a really whirlwind tour in the last couple of days as they went from what looked like an impossible task to very narrow passage this morning.
And so, Anna, it seemed like one of the thorniest issues was the SALT cap. So walk us through what happened on that piece and where did they end up?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, the individual SALT cap was an issue that, members had been negotiating for weeks leading up to the markup, and it wasn't solved at the markup in committee. You had the chairman add a provision in committee to increase the cap up to $30,000. You had those SALT caucus members saying that wasn't sufficient. They weren't satisfied. So you knew, even though the bill was successfully made it out of markup, you knew that SALT cap was going to change prior to floor consideration. So there were lots of negotiations happening over the last several days, both with the chairman and with the speaker. The SALT caucus had their heels pretty dug in. From their perspective, if nothing happens on the bill, then the SALT cap goes away completely next year. The counter to that is, most families, while they might get a full SALT cap back, they would also a full SALT deduction back with no cap, they would also at the same time, potentially be facing higher taxes in other areas if the entire bill expires from rates or AMT coming roaring back. And so for all those reasons, I think all sides understood there was a need to find that middle ground on SALT. Over the last couple of days, with a much back and forth with the speaker, coupled with pressure from the president, telling this group to find a way to get to yes, that elusive SALT deal did emerge, and they ended up at a $40,000 cap with a small indexing for inflation over the next several years. It's the same cap for whether married or single. So you do technically still have a marriage penalty associated with it. And there's a phase out for the higher cap on incomes over $500,000. So this, ultimately, as I said, it was an elusive deal. They did get it. and it did satisfy the salt staters. But at the same time that they got to this deal, it created other problems in the package because this is such a delicate balance. And the salt deal, I think, frustrated some of the budget hawks who had other concerns in the package.
Yeah, and walk us through their concerns. How did they view it?
Well, it's interesting. And so the fiscal hawks who wanted more spending cuts sort of took a position like, hey, if you're going to give this stuff to the salt people, you need more spending cuts to offset that. And so it was a very delicate balance. And we saw in the manager's amendment that came out last night some changes that sped up, for example, the implementation of work requirements in Medicaid. And then more aggressive in the changes to the clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, all in an attempt to provide both relief to the members seeking salt relief, but also addressing the concerns of the fiscal hawks. And it was really an incredibly delicate balancing act where like every piece had to fit together just right to cobble together the votes to pass the bill this morning.
So we have the salt changes. Anna, what were the other notable changes?
So there weren't a lot of changes to the underlying mark, but in the tax space, they did include a very slight change, a taxpayer unfavorable change to BEAT, GILTI, and FDII. Presumably, they did that to try to make those provisions compliant with the Byrd Rule in the Senate under the current policy baseline. Because if you use current policy baseline, an extension of those policies presumably scored as 0. And so in order to make them Byrd compliant, you have to add a revenue impact there. They also deleted the repeal of the excise tax on indoor tanning salons. And there are some more aggressive changes to the IRA energy credits, including transferability. And the original changes restricting access to nuclear production tax credits were relaxed a little bit too. And then finally, you can't forget the baby bond savings bill, which the market originally called MAGA accounts, was renamed to Trump accounts.
Yeah. Now, at the end of the day, while it sounds like it was a pretty busy week, it sounds like it played out pretty much according to the script that the speaker, Chairman Smith, had hoped for. So they have a lot to feel good about based on this outcome. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, when the week started, the prospect of this bill passing seemed kind of remote, but, to the credit of Chairman Smith, Speaker Johnson, and President Trump, they worked diligently to identify and isolate problems and come up with solutions that didn't create other problems. Donald Trump's obviously, for the Republicans, the ultimate closer, but a lot of the really heavy lifting was done by the Speaker Johnson in trying to sort of bring recalcitrant members together and to find ways to get them to yes. And so really, of course, now the attention is going to shift to the Senate, which has to produce a version of its bill too. And there's going to be some real interesting dynamics to watch out for there. One of which, of course, is that the Senate instructions that we talked about in the past, Carrie, for reconciliation are very, very different. They start with a much lower minimum level of spending cuts than the House, and they have a much bigger space for tax cuts, where the House bill cuts taxes by a net of $4 trillion versus a current law baseline. Applying the Senate construct to a current law baseline would allow for tax cuts of about $5.3 trillion. So they have a different space to do things, and we expect them to produce a different bill.
Very interesting. So, Anna, what changes might we see in the Senate?
So I think that I saw a quote from a senator this afternoon that I thought was pretty good. They said, when asked if the Senate would rewrite the bill, they said, I don't suspect we'll tear the whole thing apart, but we're probably going to repaint some of the interior walls. And I thought that was pretty illustrative that they are going to make some fairly significant changes here. You've heard members say they want to take another look at what they did on the IRA clean energy credits. I think you have some members, even some senior members of the Finance Committee, who have investments in their states from some of these credits. Some of them have long history with some of the credits going back pre-IRA that they want to see see maintained. And so I do think you'll have them take another look, and whether it's, pushing the duration out a little further or trying to make transferability work a little better, looking at, the new reforms in the foreign entity of concern space. I think they'll look at all of that in the IRA part of the package. There's also, I think, an interest to try to do more on the international provisions. You've had members of the Finance Committee introduce bills in the last few months to do more kind of taxpayer-friendly reforms on GILTI B and FDII. So I think you could see them try to do that if they have the revenue space to do it. And then I think that you also have a real desire, and you've heard Chairman Crapo, you've heard Leader Thune over the last several months both talk about wanting to try to make as many of these provisions permanent as possible. And if you think about the business provisions in the House Bill 174 R&D amortization, bonus depreciation, 163J, those are all done through 2029. And so I could see the Senate trying to figure out if they have the revenue space to make those provisions permanent. And then the Senate does have a lot of members who've been around for a while and who have a lot of their own priorities, things that they've worked on for a number of years and haven't had a lot of legislative vehicles to carry them. And so I would fully expect you're going to have a list of member priorities that they try to find a way to fit in. Chairman Crapo has already indicated he's received over 200 ideas from his colleagues. And so I think they'll probably be looking for opportunities to put some of those into the package as well. On the non-tax front, you've heard some senators express concerns about some of the spending cuts that are in the House bill, both on Medicaid and on the nutrition programs. So I think they might take another look at some of those spending cuts. And then they're going to have to deal with the reconciliation rules and the bird bath process. And it's certainly possible that some of the provisions that were included in the House package could fall out if challenged under the bird rule. There are definitely going to be challenges to a lot of the non-tax pieces, but you could even see challenges to some of the tax pieces, whether it's, a new Section 899 or some of the changes in the energy space. I'd expect there's going to be a vigorous debate before the Senate parliamentarian about whether or not those provisions meet the requirements under the bird rule. So you got to wonder if some of the changes that they're going to make in the Senate are going to run counter to maintaining the delicate balance that we saw come out of the House in this House package this morning. And, House members have to wonder if those deals that they were able to cut with the Speaker are going to have a really short shelf life. And, I'm sure they're all hoping they're going to survive this Senate process now. As I mentioned, in addition to the policy changes, you've got the bird process, and the committees are going to have to go through every line of the bill with the parliamentarian. They're going to do written briefs for the parliamentarian defending or opposing these provisions, inclusion. And then on some of them, the parliamentarian will actually call them both in to have oral arguments before her, where she'll then issue a ruling at some point after those arguments. And so this could take a number of days, if not weeks, to go kind of line by line through this bill to figure out what is going to be allowed and what isn't going to be allowed. As I said, I think the non-tax items are probably more at risk under the bird bath process, but some of the tax items could be at risk as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And then, of course, the big question is whether or not the use of the current policy baseline is going to be allowed, and whether or not she will make that determination, or whether there will be another Senate process used to allow that to happen. I think that there are, serious long-term ramifications in terms of how both the Senate operates and our nation's long-term budget outlook if they do move forward with the current policy baseline in this bill.
And we talked about that the last time we were together, and it is certainly interesting, the introduction of that as a concept. John, what do you think the outcome is going to be around the baseline question?
Well, to Anna's point, we don't know for sure, but we do know that John Thune, the Senate GOP leader, and Mike Crapo, the Finance Committee chairman, are pretty cautious and deliberate people by nature. And they have to feel like they have a really good chance of convincing the parliamentarian that the Budget Act allows them, or the Budget Committee chairman, in this case, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, to choose a baseline against which then it's her job to measure whether or not the reconciliation bill complies with it. So we think they feel like they're in good space on that. As Anna points out, there's real questions about what this means long term. Permanent treatment for some aspects of current law, but not other aspects of current law, like New Markets Tax Credit for CFC look through. And also, on a similar vein, why should we treat certain provisions of current law as permanent, but then when you're adding new pieces like a deduction for tips or overtime, that those don't get counted as current law and scored on a permanent basis. So there's a lot of weird wrinkles to this, but I think the leadership feels like they're in a good place to be able to pursue this and not have that derail their construct for a reconciliation bill.
So the speaker met his self-imposed Memorial Day deadline, and I know the president wants it signed into law by July 4th. Do we think that happens?
For the reasons that Anna just laid out, I think it's very difficult. The Byrd rule process is laborious and time-consuming. It will take some time for senators to negotiate amongst themselves as to what they want to do. Whatever they produce will have to go back to the House, and House members who thought they got commitments from the speaker on whether it's IRA or Medicaid or SALT may be disappointed by what comes back from the Senate. And so the real deadline to watch, though, is the debt limit. That's the one that can't be ignored. But that's the deadline that really is immovable, which we think forces them to complete action on the bill by the end of July before they leave DC for the August recess. And as I mentioned in our last podcast, Carrie, it's important to view the debt limit not just as a deadline, but also as a magic wand that will help Republicans get recalcitrant members over the line, because they will tell members that if you vote against this bill, and they don't love it, it doesn't do what we told you it was going to do earlier in the process on IRA or Medicaid or SALT or whatever else, but if you vote against it, you will go down in history. And do you really want your obituary to be that you presided over or responsible for the greatest economic collapse in world's history? And we think that's going to be the sort of the leverage point that the Speaker, Leader Thune, President Trump will be able to use to get recalcitrant members to yes at the end of the day.
All right. Well, lots more to come, I guess. And of course, we will be back to talk as further updates are warranted in the days ahead, especially as it works its way through the Senate. Thank you, audience, for listening in. If you'd like any additional information, go to Deloitte.com and search on Tax News and Views. You can receive the weekly email version of Tax News and Views. And of course, I hope you join us again. In the meantime, be well, everyone.